Yeah. I hope that this now works on YouTube. Yeah, welcome back to everyone on YouTube, and yeah, thank you for joining me. So I'm going to be talking about language materials. I want to talk about their efficacy and in terms of how well they work and what we can expect from them, but also about things to do with, um, you know, I see a lot of comments about whether or not people sell materials just for the sales and if they actually work. And I see comments on both sides of the fence where people talk about, is this just a money making thing? Is this actually something that will work? And I wanted to explore my thoughts on this and also look at how language materials can make us feel. So, when we come across words that we don't know and things that we're unsure of. And also, I would like to just sort of, if I can, touch also on language materials in languages that are not readily or easily findable. So where we don't have so many materials available. So I will do my best to go through all of that. And also just sort of talk through any questions you have as well. So I think the first thing to say is, language courses like Assimil, Teach Yourself, Colloquial, um, and then there are many others like Pimsleur. There are audio ones like the Michael Thomas course as well as Pimsleur. You have a number of courses available, and in the past there were lots of courses that you could get for like Linguaphone and things like that too. And if you're interested in knowing what those courses have in them, then I can definitely recommend Professor Alexander Ogwalis's sort of discussions on looking through the courses and discussing how they work, because I think that's probably the best thing I know out there. That with going through it and actually having a deep dive into each one. And what I wanted to say is, and this has come up really because I want to offer the chance to people to be able to study with me in the new year. I've been enjoying having some students, people to study with this year during COVID, and it's something I want to do a little bit more of. I've enjoyed doing it. It's a lot of fun. I get a lot of pleasure from doing it myself. And also, if I can help, then I'm very, very happy. And this video will be saved, yes. So even with the bit at the beginning with me stumbling on YouTube to get the sound working. So what I would like to say is that even this hasn't been my area of work. So teaching people languages and I'm creating courses and things like that has not been what I've been doing with my professional life in a way to make money. So I mean, I've spoken on the topic. I've had people study with me, and I've also done things in this area, but it's not been my main focus of my profession. And so I haven't really had a dog in the race, so to speak. And I saw somebody mention Ollie Richards' short stories, and of course, I worked with Ollie on helping to create the French stories, and my role in doing that was really in a consultative way, things that we would need to adapt and change and look at to make it as relevant as possible for people learning French. Being a French speaker myself, it made sense for Ollie to talk to me about that. We were already talking about other things, so it was a nice project for me to work on the side, and I enjoyed doing it. And I've had good feedback about the course, and we got some great people on board as well to sort of give feedback throughout the sort of the development process too, which is fantastic. Now, when it comes to creating language materials, there is quite a balance to be had. First of all, language materials have to be created for a general public, usually. Um, so ones that are going to be mass marketed, there is some sense and rhyme and reason to creating something that will appeal to the widest market possible. Now, that does make sense. However, it's always going to call people to feel that people are making money and that's what it is. But let's be frank and let's be honest. It's also a business. There is the desire to help people. There is the desire to create useful materials, but it is a business, and there's nothing wrong with a business being a business. There's nothing wrong with people making money from their expertise, their knowledge, their know-how. And so typically in many, I understand the sort of the European mentality, because as a European myself, I understand the difference between how we in Europe often sometimes will see things like this, and in the US, for example, where there's more of a capitalist mindset on sort of on making money and chasing the dollar. I think that in the US, people will appreciate that possibly more, and in the beginning, and expect this to be a business with money. Now, it doesn't matter how we cut it, there's always going to be a standard form. And as we know with human beings, we are not all standard forms. Okay, we are all individuals. We all have slightly different ways of experiencing things and understanding things. And that explains why whenever I do one of these lives, or whenever I talk to somebody, or whenever I write something, or whenever I give a presentation, people will come to me and say, and I've had this happen quite a lot, people will say, I think I've heard what you've said before, but the way you put it actually just made something click in my brain. And I know that some of the things that I'm saying are absolutely not something that I'm the only one saying. So, I mean, friends of mine and also people generally in the language space have created how to learn a language type materials, right? On generally how to learn languages. Now, what they're writing isn't problematic in terms of they're not giving you really bad advice. The ones that I've seen, like Alex Rawlings, for example, the advice is fine. It's solid advice. Ollie gives some solid advice. Benny gives some solid advice, and it's not that they're just giving you this sort of watered down version. And I'm not selling their courses. As I say, I don't have a dog in the race in this. I don't earn any money from this. But what I think is important to understand is that why it will work or partially work for one person and then not another is because it depends how something is worded to match the individual who's reading it. And that's why when I get these comments of, you said it in a way that really made sense to me. And this is why when I work with people individually, and when I see the individual language learning process, I think this is why that's particularly powerful. Now, I also think that doing these lives is important because I may be repeating some things that you've heard before in different ways, just because I've got my own personal take on things and I've got my own personal way of doing things. Luca will have his personal way of doing things. And all of these things together mean that we all get to experience what people can do with languages, and hear them in a way that may be packaged right for us at a specific time in our lives. And that language and that way of packaging something really is important to to highlight, because if you write a book, or you write a course, or you write a blog post, or you create I don't know, a video course, an audio course, a podcast, whatever you create, you have to choose one way of writing it. And somebody who's writing these things, like Ollie, like Luca, like like Alex, anyone in these fields, Lydia, I'm trying to rename them all, but it's very difficult. But if all of them could write something, right, and they'll all write it in a different way, but it could be the way I say it works well for you. It could be the way Judith Meyer says it works well for you. It could be, who knows, it could be that Stu J puts it in a way that works well for you. The key is that we're all repeating these things, and that there are nuggets of truth for everyone in there. And the reason why I say there are nuggets of truth in there for everyone is because we all have different personalities. We all react to different things, and we all need things to be said in different ways and packaged in different ways for it to be acceptable to ourselves. Right? This is just how life is. And we all have different personality types. I mean, if you feel you're more of an outgoing extrovert type person, or if you feel that you're more of an introvert and you maybe feel shy, or you're more of a polymath or more of a polyglot, or whatever it is you feel, of course, the voice of somebody with that type of experience and shared feeling is possibly going to resonate more with you than it is with somebody who's the opposite side of the sort of the circle of language learning, if you will. So when you take a book like Teach Yourself, like Assimil, like Colloquial, or you take an audio course, or whatever you take, what you need to be conscious of is that these were written for a very broad range of people. And so what you get out of them is what you put in. The only piece of truth in any of this that is true for everyone is if you don't do anything with it, nothing will happen. If you put 0 in, you get 0 out. It's not going to magically create language out of thin air. The thin air is just, it doesn't work. It's not osmosis. You have to constantly be working on the language and thinking about the language. That's the only truth in anything. No matter which method you choose, no matter which course you buy, no matter what you do, if you're not doing something regularly, nothing's going to happen. Unfortunately, sort of hoping and crossing your fingers and sitting in the corner saying please, 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 please is not going to work. And the only person to blame for that is you. I know that's not what people like to hear, but it's true. And it's not that you're to blame in that you should feel shame or something bad about it. It means that you're the one that needs to instigate the change when I say blame. So it's not blame in the way of, yeah, you sort of hit yourself on the back or anything like that. I'm absolutely not. I'm not advocating anything like that. And you shouldn't feel bad. You should feel actually that you're a normal human being if you hit that kind of rock in the road. I've hit it many times and I feel bad for a little bit, and then I get up and reevaluate things, and it's completely normal. But the things that we pick up, we need to evaluate what works for us. So let me give you an example. There's me and there's Luca. Okay, Luca's a good example because Luca works in a very different way than I do with language learning, generally speaking. Luca will analyze text till the cows come home. He will draw all over the text and do different things and sort of do translations backwards and forwards, kind of like the Assimil method way of doing it. Now, when I read Assimil, for example, I don't particularly enjoy doing the backwards and forwards translations. I much prefer to just read and try and repeat and try and change out words and phrases as I'm learning. So if I'm reading about, I don't know, let's say something to do with going out to a restaurant and ordering something, I'd much prefer to take that topic, take that dialogue, or take that text, read it for what it is in the language as it's originally written, but then think about what I would want to be able to say with that same type of vocabulary. And the only way to do that is to exchange out the words that I don't need. So, for example, I don't know. This is where it's very, very important to know what's important to you in terms of language to learn. You could sit down and learn pages and pages and pages of vocabulary that's completely useless. I mean, let's say, for example, you've got lots of vocabulary about members of the family, as an example. You could learn brother-in-law, sister-in-law, grandmother, grandfather, brother, sister, husband, wife, whatever you want to learn. You can learn all of these things, right? But the important thing is you focus on the ones that are important for you first, because if you can't talk about your life, then you can't understand, you can't partake in the conversation. So knowing what to focus on is super, super important. And so when you go through a course like any of the ones I've mentioned, I find it particularly important and more rewarding, in fact, for my time to focus on the things that I need to say or want to say or will likely have cause to say in the very first instance. What I find is that the other types of vocabulary from that may be important to other people will come through over time. And that's where I think it's important to be flexible in your learning, to adapt the text to what you need and to get out of them what is there, but also not go so far into them to learn the vocabulary in them that's not relevant to you. You can very easily learn what the meaning is, skip over it, and have it as a passive piece of vocabulary for a while. If, for example, you don't remember all of the numbers or how to tell the time perfectly straight away, quite honestly, numbers and learning how to tell the time are some of the very first things that people learn. They're also some of the later things that people get right fluently, easily, and can just work without having to think about them. Some people maybe can, but I've come across enough people to say that they've got to say a B1, B2 level in a language, and they're still struggling to say a number. And if that's you, that's also been me. That's also been many, many people who I know who can speak a language well, because these are things that we often have hundreds and hundreds of words that we need to learn, and then we don't use them. I mean, in a language like Chinese or Japanese or Korean, where they have a very different way of like talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, whatever, the different words for some of these ideas, right? Yes, it's important to know them, but if you're not based in a country where you're using that language and talking about prices, do you put that over learning things that are more relevant and things that you're more likely to talk about with a speaker of that language on the internet, for example? My answer is no. Yeah, go through them by all means. See if you can understand it, but recognize and accept that it's fine to know that you're going to make mistakes and need to go back. So when you're going through a course like that, it's fine to go back. It's fine to update that kind of knowledge that's very specific as time goes on. As time goes on with language learning, you can get to a kind of an A2, B1 level in a language and pretty much get by in most situations. I mean, you'll be able to sort of talk around things in quite a good way. So I've got that kind of level in Turkish where I've done my B1 exam. I did it many, many years ago. And with Turkish, I can have a conversation with people. I can make myself understood. I might not know all of the words. I might make mistakes of the grammar. But it doesn't matter because generally people do understand me, and I've had quite nice conversations in Turkish. But this is what happens as well. And this is what happened to my friend James with German. He wrote to me and said that he'd got to this level and then he picked up a book that was aimed at C1. And I've done this with Turkish. I've picked up books that are aimed at sort of B2, C1 level in Turkish. And you read it, and then you see all of these words that you don't know. Okay, yes, that happens. And yes, there's a lot more to learn. What that shows you is that you're not suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect of language learning. You recognize that there's much more to learn, which I think is a positive thing. Now, this is the important thing. Just because there are all of these words that you haven't mastered or learned, or maybe sometimes even don't even understand at all, does not mean or devalue, it doesn't mean that you've sort of devalued the language ability that you've got already. It also doesn't mean or devalue the fact that you can already communicate on your A2, B1 level effectively, or even if you're a B1, B2, you can still use the language to that degree and it's still valid. The only thing is that you still have a lot more to learn if you want to go deeper into the language. That's all it means. Because on a day-to-day conversational basis, we don't talk about every single thing that you see in one of these B2 or C1 or whatever it is books, we don't talk about the kinds of texts and vocabulary all the time. I mean, they may come up in the news if you're watching the news, they may come up in conversation, but you'll find that, for example, I don't know, if there's an earthquake, the word for earthquake you may not have learned. But if it comes up in Turkish, and in Turkish the word for earthquake is deprem. But if it comes up in Turkish, you'll find that it's around you everywhere. And people are using the language all the time. So you need to ask once, and then it's repeated so many times that eventually you know the word. The thing to remember with, sort of leveling up these, sort of laddering your language and leveling up and getting more vocabulary and getting to this sort of B2, C1, whatever level that you imagine you want to get to, is that it takes time. And you're going to come across texts on subjects that you haven't learnt the vocabulary for, particularly if those texts or those languages relate to words that are absolutely outside of your linguistic knowledge. So if you're not talking about, learning French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Latinate languages, particularly from English, of course there are going to be a lot of words that you're not going to know. It's absolutely natural. So I say take it easy and feel encouraged by what you do know, and that you understand that there's a lot more to learn. So yeah, I hope that I hope that makes sense to you out there, and that you know what I want to say with this, and that if you have this struggle, that you feel encouraged that it happens to me and it happens to other people. It really does. Now, the other question that I got was on Twitter, and it was about like languages that don't have as many materials available. Now, this is actually true with my home language. So, as many of you know, my home language is Macedonian, and it has been for 17 years. That's a long time. We don't tend to find that many people who learn Macedonian to a high level. We tend to find people come from other countries and maybe get to sort of a basic conversational level, maybe. But very often, a lot of people who come here don't even learn, or don't learn very much, just maybe very basic courtesies, which is fine. It's everyone's choice. And I don't prescribe to sort of tell everyone what they should do or they shouldn't do. For me, there was one book that we could use for the language, and this is true for many languages out there. There may be one book, there may even be only a very small book. And what it means if you are in that situation is that you have to be, as I said in the beginning, with general books and the sort of the amount of books out there. Pick a book or a couple of books that you can look at and use, and be flexible. Okay. But if you only have one book, or sort of a small book, then you have to be even more flexible and even more creative with the work, with what you have. So one of the things that you can do is find a teacher of the language. This is what I did with Macedonian. So when I got the book, I had the book. I had studied a Slavic language before, so it was kind of accessible to a degree. But there are a number of very different things that happen in Macedonian that happen in Czech. But I found a teacher and in London, and we would meet once a week, and I would read out what I had, just read the material that I had in Macedonian, to check my pronunciation, to check that it was understandable, and then try and manipulate the text in a way that made sense for me. So, for example, if it said in the text that the sun was shining, but for me at the weekend it was raining, I would change sunshine for rain. If it said that I went to a restaurant and I ate, I don't know, lobster and caviar or whatever I ate, maybe I was feeling very extravagant that day, then I would change that for something more like fish and chips, like a very good Brit. I would eat fish and chips for my dinner, and that would be it. It could also be that, the person in the text likes to play football and I don't. I maybe like horse riding or swimming or something else that I like. And so I would change things out to match my life, because they're the things that I'm most likely to talk about. I mean, if I don't know much about football, for example, in my language, and I can't really make a conversation about it that means very much, except for I don't really know much about football, I don't really like football very much, then I'm not likely to really want to do that or to do that in another language. So this is where I say you need to kind of take what you have, turn it, and this is where you, if you find people from that language community who can help you to do that, then so much the better. We do live in a very privileged era now, because when I was younger, we didn't have the internet to the same degree. When I was learning Macedonian for the first time, the internet as we know it now did not exist in the same way. I didn't have access to all of the sort of online newspapers in Macedonian, for example, that didn't exist. Nowadays, you can find newspapers or articles or videos, things on YouTube in the languages. If you don't know where to find that stuff, you've got loads of people online who speak that language, and you can ask them. Look for Twitter tags, find out the name of the language in the language, and do a Twitter tag for it and see. Look for a tag just on Google, just on a Google search. Look for groups of people who are learning it, who speak it. Again, do sort of looking for language enthusiasts for that language or people teaching that language, and find them and connect with them and get the exposure. This is the only way you can really do it. I mean, if you don't have the materials, you have to use the tools that are available to you. So, I mean, I could talk forever about, sort of things you could potentially do, but these are concrete things that you can do. You can use it to find groups, to find speakers. You can use it to find their media outlets. You can then find people who will help you to understand what's going on. You can find parallel religious texts. I've mentioned religious texts before. They can be quite useful for getting comparisons. Um, you know, things like the Bible have been translated into many languages, and you can find stories in both. You can often find things like dictionaries or whatever else, and you can find things like this nowadays that you couldn't get before, when you were trying to learn a language without the internet. So yeah, they're my general thoughts on what you can do, and I think that I've probably taken enough time talking about me and my thoughts, and possibly I would like to hear from you and see what you want to say or what you'd like to ask. Um, Thank you. Let me see. Yeah, I'm glad to see some of you are writing to say, you find it's important to use the things that I'm talking about. I think that's really, really good. Um, and that you understand what I mean. Um, how can I improve my writing in my target language? Okay, I mean, so if you want to improve your writing, you have to write. If you mean just your sort of writing in the language, my friend Robin McPherson has Journaly. You can sign up for a Journaly account, and you can practice your writing in whichever target language you have, and speakers of that language will come and correct it for you and give you feedback. So there we go. Very easy solution for one of those issues. So if you want to do that, you could definitely go over to see what Robin set up. He's worked very hard, and he's a very kind man. So have a look and see if that works for you. If you want to practice your writing, um, is target language knowledge related to first language knowledge? It can be. It can be. So with languages like English and French, for example, English has over 60% of its vocabulary is from it's Latinate. It's from Norman French predominantly, but also Latin words directly from Latin, but also from other words from other languages potentially too, particularly words like from music from Italian and whatever else. So you do have quite a lot of vocabulary. So if your English is particularly good, then you're going to have an easier time of learning French. If you're well read in English, you're going to be able to understand a lot more French vocabulary straight away. But vice versa, if you learn French, then you'd be able to go back to your English as I did. For me, it worked the other way. I learned French when I was younger, and I found that when I got to English literature at school, I had a very easy time of understanding English literature because of my knowledge of French. So when we got to texts, I didn't need to skim over words I didn't know, or I was finding that I was able to understand them quite readily. So yes, they can be linked, absolutely. Okay, I can see. Let me see if I can see any more questions here. Okay, I'll do my best to go through the questions now on YouTube. If you have any more on Instagram, please do put them in the Q&A box, and I can find them more easily. Okay, du hörst mich ganz gut. Ja, sehr gut, Timothy. Danke. It's working. Yeah, hurrah. Okay, that's cool. So I see. Kan du prata svenska fortfarande? Ja, det kan jag. Ja. Men jag arbetade på svenska, så och jag studerade också, jag på universitetet där i Sverige, så ja, du måste ha så, ja, lite grann mer svenska än bara hello, hej, hur mår du? Vet du? Så ja, det går okej. Det går helt okej. Hi from Denmark. Thank you very much, Sigurd. Ja, tack. Tack ska du ha. ¿Cómo aprender un idioma desde cero y llegar a un nivel intermedio? Depende del idioma. La verdad es que con cada idioma sí que hay que tener un curso para empezar a aprender algo, ¿no? Y eso es lo que estoy diciendo, pues en inglés, pero es que hay que escoger un curso que te guste y pues empezar así, estudiando cada día, hablando a lo mejor con otra persona que está estudiando el mismo idioma o con un profesor, una profesora. am, o profesora, a ver, porque tenemos también profesores ahora en español. am, y, y pues estudiando con personas y también solito, solita, solita, también puede ser. Es súper importante. Creo que em, se puede hacer algo desde cero así, utilizando también el audio que tiene con el curso, porque así escuchando y imitando también el idioma, el ritmo, la pronunciación del idioma es súper importante. Así que creo que eso sí para mí sí que funciona bastante bien. Am, y lo veo es continuar así y no tener también miedo de lo que has olvidado, porque es algo muy natural, muy normal. Yo también olvido muchas cosas en mi idioma, y a veces con idiomas nuevos, por ejemplo, yo llevo no sé cuánto tiempo estudiando más idiomas durante la pandemia, y a veces sí que no sé alguna palabra para un número o lo que sea. Pero lo que pasa es que no pasa nada porque no disminuye mi nivel en el idioma para decir lo que quiero decir. Lo que pasa es que a veces cosas así son más difíciles para dominar perfectamente y luego para ir adelante con otro tema. Las cosas más importantes son las cosas más importantes para ti, para tu vida, y por eso digo que siempre mejor concentrarte en lo que tienes que saber para expresar lo que para ti es importante en tu vida, para tener una conversación con otra persona, eso sí que es. Pero siempre es para la comunicación, no con otra persona. Siempre es así. La comunicación es para mí, la cosa más importante para aprender un idioma. Am, ok. Ok. Cześć, ahoy, hola. Wow, ni hao, zdravo. Wow, that's a lot. Aloha. Wow, nice to see you from Michigan. Um, repetition, uh, or rather iteration, is key to learning. Absolutely. Repetition of what works as well. I mean, repetition of not just of the learning, but also repetition of what works for you, and things that are important to remember on the journey. Also, I mean, it's super interesting that repetition comes up again and again and again and again. See what I did there? Bonsoir, j'ai une question un peu stupide. Il y a des questions stupides, je suis désolé. Je vais voir si elle est stupide ou pas. Doit-on choisir sa méthode en fonction de la langue qu'on apprend? Apprendre une langue, tonal chinois vietnamien, différemment d'une langue, latine, ouais, oui, oui, ça c'est vrai, oui, c'est bien une différence entre les 2. Si on apprend, par exemple, si on parle chinois, si on essaie de parler chinois, oui, c'est important au début de savoir les différences de base entre les langues, ce qu'on veut apprendre, quoi. Donc oui, il faut vraiment, hein, il faut travailler sur les temps, par exemple, du chinois, pour pouvoir lire les textes, hem et pour aussi pouvoir reproduire la langue. Ça, c'est très important. Avec des bon, mais avec toutes les langues, c'est à peu près la même chose, mais avec le chinois, peut-être parce que si on est francophone, on parle anglais, par exemple, on parle espagnol, on parle notre langue, pareil. Donc c'est vachement différent parce que tu vas commencer de 0. Tu vas commencer sans, par exemple, les mots qu'on a en commun entre l'anglais et le français et l'espagnol. Parce qu'on a beaucoup de bon, on a beaucoup de mots en commun, quoi. Hem et donc oui, ça va changer un peu ce qu'on fait au début et puis après, beh, ça revient aussi, à tout ce que j'ai dit en anglais, c'est d'avoir des textes ou bien des dialogues, ce qu'on va utiliser pour pratiquer la langue avec quelqu'un d'autre et pour prendre des mots, ce qu'on veut utiliser et les changer, pour des mots, ce qu'on va vraiment utiliser pour parler de nous, pour parler de notre vie et ça c'est l'important, à la fin avec toutes les langues. Heu, Jusqu'à ce moment-là, ce que je fais, hem I'm learning 2 languages, Japanese and French, both at beginner levels. I want to add another one, which is Spanish, and I'm not sure if I should do that because I'm a beginner. I need your help. Um, so my experience is that you can learn multiple languages at the same time, potentially. Depends how much spare time you have, and it depends how much energy you have. Um, it can also be a thing that will slow down your learning generally if you take on too many at one time. Um, so it's one of those things that I would always say, try it. And if you find that you're getting sort of it's affecting the way you learn the other languages and the new language, then it could be that you're probably best to just leave it to one side. Spanish isn't going anywhere, so you can pick it up at another time. It's not like, for example, you miss a bus and it's the last bus to wherever you're going to go. You can leave it. There's nothing wrong with it, with leaving it for maybe even a year until you feel more comfortable with French or and Japanese. Um, but if you learn Spanish, for example, a year into French or whatever, you'll find that your French will help you to get access to the Spanish. So it's not like, for example, when you learn one language from a group and you have the other one. Yes, it's you still have to learn it. It does take time. It's not that it doesn't take time, but what you'll find is you get used to that way of thinking in that language group, and then that language family, and then the other one feels a little easier to access. Whereas if you start them both at the same time, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to manage. So try it and see how you get on. Is my honest advice. Cam, how many hours do you think C1 of a language generally takes? The FSI, etc., says about 650, but when I asked C1 level learners on the German Reddit, they generally said about 2000. Um, so I think it would depend a lot on the person, but also a lot on and the background in language and in languages. Um, so there's not one answer for this, Cam, unfortunately. For example, somebody who speaks Dutch, someone who speaks Swedish, someone who speaks, I don't know, another language related to German in addition to English or something else, then it's going to be easier and quicker, for sure. It's just the way it is, because you're going to have maybe more sayings, turns of phrase, vocabulary generally, grammatical similarities, in common with German. So it would depend. The 650 hours feels like the straight study sessions and not the practice. So I would probably lean more towards what you're seeing on Reddit. I don't know an exact number to give you, um, but it would feel that you would need to do quite a lot of practice and repetition. So To give you an example, FSI is saying 650. It depends. If you're following it all, it is difficult to say, but it could be a lot longer than that. It depends on what you're using, and it depends on where you are in your situation. But yeah, it could be more than 650 hours for sure. C1 is quite a high level in a language. The exams are quite complicated and quite in depth. So 650 hours doesn't feel like a particularly long amount of time really to be getting to that level. I mean, just to give you an example, for Turkish we did for A1 it was 75 hours of teacher time, and then 20 hours a week over a 3-month period to get to A1 in Turkish. So what's that? You're talking hundreds of hours just there for A1, right? And then the same for A2, and then double that for a B1, and double that as well for B2, and then you're not even at C1 yet. So it would feel that 650 for German might be a bit on the low side for that level. I mean, you're not doing all those hours back to back, right? So it's not like you're doing it as a full-time job for the amount of time. So it takes a long time. Hello, Richard. I'm currently 18 and I would like to learn Vietnamese, Mandarin, Japanese, and Korean to a decent level by the time you get to 30. Okay, wow. Yeah, then get cracking. if my 1 year of Korean has anything to can share from that, I've not been very, very good at it for the last year. But that's a good set of languages. You will find that if you learn, for example, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese, particularly, and then also Vietnamese, as my friend Emmanuel Tarnon says, Ternon, sorry, Manuel Ternon, he wrote a book about and sort of did talks about these languages and how they influence each other. So it's not like they're completely unrelated and they have never been. They're not mixed. You do get words that cross over, and so you will see some similarities which will help in learning that group of languages. What if input like videos, podcasts aren't quite comprehensible, even when aimed at beginners? Is it still worth it? Does passive listening help? So look, passive listening can help to a degree. What the brain can often do with language that you don't understand at all is it can turn it into white noise. So basically it just it doesn't really register the language. So you have to be listening to the language and trying to do something obvious with it. If it's not aimed at your level, it can become kind of white noise in your head, and so you don't really. I don't know how much you get from it. You get something from it maybe, but not. It needs to be meaningful input. So comprehensible input is what Stephen Krashen talks about, and I would tend to agree with that. That it needs to. It can't be just you're listening to something really random, and otherwise your brain doesn't even register to help you in the same way as, for example, something that's more meaningful, because you're talking about passive listening. So unless you're doing it in an active way and looking at the text and working through it and then listening to it once you've understood it, then maybe not the best use of your time. I would possibly say at least do the work before you have it on in the background. There's enough stuff that you can do where you can listen to it, you can work through it and then listen to it, I think. Let me see. For a new language, Romance or Germanic, do you have a go-to resource? So, Mike, if I'm very honest with you, with the Germanic and Romance languages, the resources that I used when I learned them, it's so long ago that I don't even know they exist. So for German, I used books from this language school called In Lingua, and I went through those first. They were the first things I went through, and I also looked at this BBC course, which was called. I'm trying to think what it's called. It was a BBC course with this Romanian guy called Nico, and Nico goes to Germany and he has to learn German, and he's employed at the TV studio, and Deutsch Plus it's called. So for example, with German it was that, and then the in lingua books. It would really depend. Now there's so much choice out there for these languages. The best thing to do is to go and have a look at which books appeal to you, because if a book appeals to you, you're more likely to open it and go to it and study. And if it doesn't appeal to you, you're not. You're going to be like, oh, I don't want to open that book. It looks awful. So that would be my first piece of advice, would be to do that, to make sure it's something that appeals to you. And that just takes some time to sit in a bookshop and pick out a few that appeal to you and look through them and see what makes sense. Read a few of the exercises, read a few of the descriptions of what they're trying to teach you. Read the text. Are they interesting to you? Do you like the layout? Do you find it interesting? Is it something you go back to? And that's kind of what I would say. You can always add extra things in, like the Deutsche Welle TV have a lot of things for German, for example. Whether for learners, they have lots and lots of things on there now. And also you've got the extra for French, Spanish, and German on YouTube that you can do. Extra spelled EXTR and then the @ sign, and then just put in German, French, Spanish, and they have an English one as well. So yeah, so you can get a little bit of a sort of a basic like Friends type thing, but for learners of those languages. Hay muchos idiomas que no puedes aprender de un libro. Tienes que hablar na przykład język polski. No tak, ale ja myślę, że no możesz trochę. Także nauczyłem się polskiego. Mam książkę, teraz to jest tutaj, ale no to jest Polish in 4 weeks. No, przeczytałem tę książkę po polsku, a to and then I kind of just practiced. Mówiłem po polsku z ludźmi w Polsce. A to było w porządku, ale mówiłem i po czesku bardzo dobrze to przyszło no, w uniwersytecie w Pradze. Także to... Yeah, but I know what you mean. Sometimes some languages you need to just speak, and I get it. You do need to speak. You need to speak through. There's depends on where you're coming from, I think, Robert, as well. Hola, una pregunta. Estoy estudiando lenguas modernas en la universidad. Mi recomendación, o todo lo que estaba diciendo, la verdad, en general, pero a lo mejor en mi vocabulario, es que estudiar contexto que sean textos para ti interesantes para leer. Y luego haciendo a lo mejor también una así de lo que estás leyendo, y pensando, reflejando en el vocabulario que utilizan también en los textos. Eso sí que ayuda bastante para hacer esto. Y intentar también a hacer un resumen de lo que estás leyendo en el idioma, utilizando las palabras clave del idioma, puede ser también una ayuda. Y pues esto, creo. Hey Rasmus, yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. What level is your Macedonian and French? So, I mean, I've been speaking Macedonian for like 17 years as a home language, so fairly good. Fairly good. I mean, yeah, I mean, that we don't have these language exams, but yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem in pretty much any area. I can talk about very, very technical things in Macedonian. Talk about pretty much anything I can talk about in English, I can talk about in Macedonian, pretty much, and similar in French, really. So yeah, pretty much that's kind of where I am. So yeah, I mean, I can talk about, because I've been through many situations, right? In language. So yeah, I don't know at exact levels is very difficult, but yeah, it's pretty good. Dash na cele w жизни. Okay. языков, что-то, посмотрите лет, сейчас работать. Я работаю с языками здесь. Я работаю, у меня тоже проекты, которые проживают много языков, и поэтому я проживаю мои знания языков для этого. И, но это в социальном медиа, в социальных медиах, и поэтому, надо делать чуть-чуть разные в одной стране, а не как в другие, например. Но, в принципе, я думаю, что, для меня это, больше только потому, что мне нравится коммуникация, в разных языках, и поэтому я продолжаю, языки, изучаться языков, и поэтому, я делаю это. А, цель? У меня нет цели. Я думаю, что, как я мне нравится, и это просто так. У меня нет цели, потому что нам не надо говорить на новых языках. Надо только говорить. Я думаю, что, когда я я я начал, работать с языками, но мне было нужно только говорить по-английски, по-немецки, по-французски и, может быть, и по-испански. А п после этого, не, это было, мой выбор. Я хотел, изучаться еще, дальше языки. И поэтому, но если надо говорить 100% хорошую грамматику, я думаю, что, это тоже не очень важно. Если у нас, коммуникация, если у нас тоже возможность, действительно, я не знаю, как я хочу, сказать, для меня это, самое главное. И, ну, это, вот что я делаю. What level can we achieve after finishing an Asimil book? Good question. So on these books, generally they say like a B2 level. If I'm honest, I don't agree that it's a B2 level that people have after they finish the book on its own. If you haven't worked with a teacher and used other texts and things, you don't have the vocabulary of a B2 student usually, if you've been through like B2 courses. So, I mean, just to give you an example, I showed you this book before for Greek. This is just the B2 book for Greek, okay? Okay, and then this is a big book, right? This is the Serbian book for complete. You can see it's a lot smaller, and this is from like the very beginning, okay? Then you have, let me see if I can get another one for you, 1 second. Here's Indonesian for l'Indonésien sans peine for Asimil, right? So look at the size of the books compared to this, and this is just for B2, okay? This is just B2. So you can't possibly have, after doing one of these, the vocabulary that you would have after having done the B1 course is the same thickness with lots and lots of words and lots of text in it. Then you've got the A1 and A2, which are probably both combined about as thick as this, maybe a little bit thicker. So those kinds of comparisons of levels, and I know that they say B2, and I know that's kind of how it works, but I believe that they do say that they recognize that you wouldn't have maybe all of the vocabulary that you'd need to be at B2. Because I mean, there's a lot to learn to get to to be able to understand some of the things at B2. It's like so much vocabulary. So not tried to learn. Okay, I also tried to learn German with Nico. Yeah, a lot of it, but he was Romanian. I was doing quite well to switch to Sanskrit and Hindi. Now my German's a mess. Yeah, I know that feeling. Not with German, but with other languages, absolutely. It's better to read without audio. Following an audiobook. Some people actually really like reading along with an audiobook. So you have the text and then you have the audio as well. I mean, that's kind of the principle of Link, right? Which works pretty well. Link's pretty cool. How do you make the transition comprehensive, understand, producing meaningful output? I can consume content in my target language and then follow along, but I can't write it, speak it outside the process. Yeah, for me personally, Cam, I actually prefer speaking. So it's one of the things that I want to be able to do when I learn a language. I'm reading's okay, but I actually like the communication. I like speaking to people. So I prioritize that. And I feel very comfortable talking to people in different languages and switching languages. I feel comfortable. Sometimes I make a mess. Sometimes it's not great, but I feel quite comfortable doing it, and I enjoy doing it, and I experience that as a learning process. But that's the thing, is you've got to be practicing it to be able to get into it. If you're not practicing it, it's not going to happen. It's like learning a language, right? If you learn a language, you have to do something. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen by just some sort of miracle. This is the thing, and this is why I said, language learning is not magic or a miracle. It's the reality is definitely that it's a mundane. You have to sit down and do it, and sometimes that doesn't feel exciting. And with practicing as well, it can feel uncomfortable. I get it; it can feel uncomfortable, but if you want to do it, you have to go through the pain barrier of doing it. There's no other way, unfortunately. Study fellowship and teach yourself. I mean, you can use techniques. For example, people use the sort of speaking to yourself type techniques, the shadowing type techniques, learning certain phrases or certain ways of turns of phrase and trying to use them in active speech, or finding a language partner, finding a teacher. You can do all these things, but it comes down to actually doing it. Yeah, when you study Polish from Teach Yourself, if you're actually living in Poland, that helps a lot, absolutely. So that was me as well, Robert. I was in Poland when I had those books and I was reading them. I agree, reaching B2 is very difficult, absolutely. I'm glad saying that, JR. Do you think schools who teach reading and writing before learning to speak and listen are teaching the language backwards? Depends. If they're teaching some languages, they might want to do that with. It depends on the language, but for me personally, yeah, if it's a living language that's spoken by people, it makes sense to speak it, because it's the easiest way to get constant practice is to speak. You can get feedback, you can hear people. It helps you to manipulate the grammar and the vocabulary and get instant feedback if people understand you or they don't understand you. So for me, yeah, it makes complete sense. For other people, they prefer just to read and they want to be a polymath. So it can be fine to just read. I would not prescribe anything particularly for individuals. I think everyone should choose what they prefer, and I would definitely not make any judgments or pronouncements on which is best, polymath, polyglot, whatever. But I would say, yeah, I'm very excited about your speaking fluently 2021. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good evening, Robert. Yeah, nice to see you. Listening to songs, absolutely. So listening to songs is really helpful. I found at university when I was studying Italian. So I studied my university degree is in French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. It's my main degree from university, my first degree. And for Italian, I found that listening to music was a really big help to get used to hearing the verbs being conjugated, to hear particularly the plurals. So the big problem with Italian, if you've learnt other Romance languages, is that they don't use the S for the plural, they use an I. And so it takes a bit of getting used to use this I, plural. Situazione, situazioni. It's a bit strange in the beginning, and I found that listening to songs helped me to normalize that for me in my head, and also to pick up vocabulary as well. Sometimes the vocabulary was absolutely useless. So one of the words that I learned from songs was un brivido. Un brivido is like a light breeze, and I've got to be honest that I don't think I've ever heard it except for in songs. No one's really ever said un brivido to me ever. but it's used a lot in Italian music as kind of like a poetic type word. But there's always going to be a trade-off, right, with songs. If you're learning English and you just go with songs, a lot of it is very non-standard, and so you learn things that maybe are not what we'd say necessarily in standard English. So if standard English is your goal and you're learning I ain't got no satisfaction from Mick Jagger, then you're going to have a bit of a surprise when people don't really talk that way. Do you ever think that, what's this? Anything against our own? Oh my word, it's a bit hard to read this on Instagram. Sorry. Acquiring fluency as a second language changes our outlook in life in some way. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not necessarily the language that changes my outlook, but getting into the culture and what's normal in a culture, absolutely. I find that some things that I thought that from the United Kingdom were normal, I no longer consider normal in the same way, or logical in the same way. So I definitely have adapted. I mean, I've been living in the Balkans now for a good quarter of my life, and then before that, I've lived in other countries and worked and studied in other countries. So it's amazing how your perception shift. What's important shifts. I don't know if that's necessarily the language, but certainly the language plays a part, because that's the vehicle for the communication of the of the culture, right? So that definitely does play a role. And also some words get different meanings as well. Like, you can't always translate everything exactly. You have a different feeling towards what something is, and it's because a certain word might relate differently to other words in the language, and that gets pretty weird when you start analyzing that and thinking about it in detail. Is there a Swedish Assimil course? There is a Swedish Assimil course. I didn't use it for my Swedish. I used colloquial Swedish because that's what my teacher wrote. He wrote that. Please recommend some good resources for learning Dutch and the best way of getting proper pronunciation. So for Dutch, I used a book called Prisma, Nederlands voor anderstaligen, Dutch for foreigners. I think it's written in both, Dutch for foreigners. That's the one I used, and it's kind of just regular type of course, but written in the Netherlands, and I used that. And then after that, we had a number of books I used in the Netherlands. They were for the NT2, which is the kind of the highest exam you can sit in the Netherlands. I used the course books for those many years ago. One was called Lezen las gelezen, so literally means to read. Lezen, las, I read. Gelezen, I have read. I think, yeah. So, but Lezen las gelezen, but that's maybe when you're a bit further into Dutch, because that's sort of talking about sort of topical issues in Dutch. But yeah, there is a Swedish Assimil. There's Dutch Assimil. There is Dutch Teach Yourself, which they're all fine. They're all fine. Whatever you choose, I think it's just that you carry on doing it and using it. And then finding a teacher for Dutch and Swedish, for example, I would recommend finding somebody to at least hear what you're saying and practice reproducing the language, because they've got some sounds that are a little bit tricky. How can you learn idioms better? This is a really weird thing. So idioms I find very odd in languages, and because you will buy these books that sort of learn these idioms, okay, and then you look through them, and if you ever do this for your own language, so for example, I've done this in English. I've looked through an idiom book written for Czech people or whatever else, some people in the world. I've done it in Czech Republic, I've done it in Poland, and I've looked through, and I'm like, we do not say this in English ever. If someone said this to me, it'd be weird. And so I often wonder if that happens the other way around as well. So that's the first thing I need to mention. The second thing is they go out of fashion and in fashion very quickly, these idioms. So it's very easy. It's often best to hear what people say and how they say it, and to ask people to repeat and write them down. Use the ones that people generally use in conversation. There's no point trying to put in a weird one that no one really uses, because it can actually make you sound a bit weird. With idioms, it's a very dangerous game to play, I think, to sound a bit weird. If you don't quite get it right, it can have the opposite effect of making you sound like a current, relevant, fluent speaker of a language. It can actually make you sound like a robot or a book, or if you don't have the hang of the language properly because you're picking up on idioms that people don't use or don't fully understand. So it can be a little bit tricky, is my experience. So go with what you see written down, go with what people are saying, go with what people are using, maybe in modern writing, for example, in newspapers, in magazines, and things like that might be useful. Ich habe okay, mal gucken, ob ich das lesen kann. Die auch Mazedonisch, Romani und ja, das ist super cool. Mehr Input, ja. Es bekommen, mehr finden, aber es ist halt, ja. Ja, das stimmt, ja. Es ist sehr wenig eigentlich für Mazedonisch. Das war eigentlich mein Problem. Aber ich muss sagen, ja, also hier sein, also hier in Mazedonien zu wohnen und mit den Leuten zu sprechen, also tagtäglich, dann kriegst du die Übung und dann kannst du die Sprache eigentlich endlich benutzen, wie die Leute hier die Sprache auch benutzen. Und das ist ja sehr wichtig. Es war sehr interessant am Anfang. Sie wollten eigentlich, dass ich so spreche, so wie im Buch, und das fand ich total doof. Warum soll ich denn jetzt sprechen, nicht wie die Leute, die hier auf der Straße sprechen, sondern wie ein Buch geschrieben wird, ne? Das finde ich ein bisschen zu dumm, und das habe ich eigentlich nicht gemacht, und habe ich eigentlich dafür gekämpft, dass ich, vielleicht mehr so umgangssprachig Umgangssprache so benutze und so. Also, das fand ich für mich persönlich viel besser, und das habe ich so jetzt für mich auch, so persönlich muss ich auch sagen, ich habe meine Idiolekt auch auf Mazedonisch. Ähm, Sachen, die ich sage. Und ja, das ist eigentlich jetzt meine Sprache geworden, und ich darf das auch machen, ne? How to learn vocabulary in an effective way. Through looking at lots of texts and getting the ones that you desperately need, so things that are important to you. It's the important thing with the words, I think, vocabulary. Where is he reading from? I'm reading from Instagram and YouTube. So there we go. When are you coming to Cholula? I hope this year. I would love to go to Cholula this year for the conference. Fingers crossed, everyone, that COVID allows us to travel again. That'd be so good. Ja, richtig. Okay. Danke. Struggling with Arabic. Could you provide some advice to help me in? Okay. I mean, my Arabic's not amazing. So I've studied Arabic a few times, but my Arabic isn't that good. Egyptian Arabic. Okay, well, that makes it a little bit more complicated for me, because I've only ever studied Fusha, modern standard Arabic, and I used Mastering Arabic and the Linguaphone course. So I've done the first book and a half of Mastering Arabic, book 1, and then half of book 2, and I've also done the Linguaphone course in Arabic, but I still don't speak it. But it would be the same advice as before. You need to find a teacher, and if you're going to do Egyptian Arabic, finding Egyptian people who will help you to convert maybe things that are in MSA, and to see how it works in Egyptian Arabic, and then saying things that you need to say first of all, and building from there. It's the same advice, really. But it's being flexible and making it your own. How many hours do I study per day? I don't really count them. I study as much as I possibly can, but I'm constantly using my languages, so it's very difficult to put a number on it. I mean, people often ask me about speaking other languages online. I don't speak English that much in my day-to-day life, so actually don't mind speaking English during these lives, and it's the most accessible language for the most people to understand, right? So I'm trying to be as accessible as possible by speaking English, but it's yeah. I mean, I normally speak lots of languages during the day, so it's kind of yeah. How long's a piece of string depends what I'm doing on that specific day. I don't really count them. Other specific verbs that you try and master first when tackling a new language. Okay, sorry a second. It just skipped. All the verbs that I particularly focus in on. So definitely sort of things that you're going to need to say, like verbs to be, to have, if they exist. They often don't exist in some languages. Things like your daily routine, what you kind of do. You do that, but then how often do you really use them? So things like to come, to go, to learn, to teach, to talk, to speak, to listen, to read. The most common verbs that you would use, generally, is what you'd learn. You focus on those kinds of verbs, that kind of vocabulary. If there are other verbs that you would use, for example, I don't know, you may want to learn them as well. But each language will have verbs that it will prefer. So it's good to see, and this is where when you read text and when you hear what people say, this is where you can start pulling out these bits of information, seeing what's important to each individual thing. Oportunidades a hablar español en Macedonia. Pues hablo español en casa, así que en casa hablamos inglés, francés, español, portugués, no, portugués, ay, perdón, alemán, macedonés también. Así que utilizamos los 5 idiomas en casa. Y luego, pues, tengo que utilizar para mi trabajo o para otra cosa, también tengo que leer cosas en varios idiomas. Y pues hablar con otra persona, ahora mismo porque con la pandemia es un poco difícil, pero sí que tengo amigos hispanoparlantes y utilizo el idioma con ellos. Y eso sí, son idiomas que sí que utilizo bastante. Okay, Japanese, Korean, quite. Songs are useful for understanding formal and informal language, basically in Japanese and Korean, because of the degrees of politeness. In comparison, our European languages are quite rude. Yeah, sounds funny. It's true, yeah. How many times do you have to learn all these languages? So I study what I want to do when I want to, really. I don't put any stress on myself. I don't have any particular need to learn. I mean, there's nothing that means I have to learn something. I just do what I want to do. And so at the moment, I've been concentrating a lot on Celtic languages, and because I want to and I can, so I do. But I don't kind of put any pressure on myself. The languages that I use for work are the ones that I've studied most. So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I've done my university studies. I've sort of carved out what I do in my career, and anything else I do is just kind of for me, really, and for my friends, and for enjoyment and travel and kinds of things like that. So, como vai a vida na Macedônia? Muito bem, obrigado. Grande abraço também da Macedônia. Muito obrigado. Let me just see. I think there are 2 more questions, and then I'll disappear for today. How did you get your rolled R's for the soft sound natural? As a Brit, I struggle. So the type sounds. Okay, I think possibly because I always used to play with sounds when I was younger. So I used to make the I move my tongue to different parts of my mouth to make different R sounds. But also my original accent and dialect in English is Scouse. So we have more sounds naturally. We have the ch sounds in Scouse that in standard English doesn't have. So yeah, so the word for chicken is chicken, and so different words that we would pronounce differently in Scouse help me to pronounce other words from other languages. And r, for example, the R sound. I used to like doing a Scottish accent when I was a kid, so I try and speak like that and roll my R's for that kind of effect for the accent. So I'd play a lot with different accents in different parts of the United Kingdom, also accents from around the world, and that helped a lot to really start using the R sound. Brr, it's cold, and things like that. That's kind of what I do, and it worked pretty well, I think. So I do that in other languages too, not just in English. I do it in other languages. So that kind of thing helps, and making those sounds with your tongue and letting the air flow from different parts of your mouth, that really helps. So I'd say try doing that. If you want to improve your ability to say different things in different ways, then play with your accents and try to do that. So you can hear kind of a little bit of a trill if you speak with a Scottish accent. It's a bit different. So yeah, try doing things like that maybe. This is the kind of thing I do. This is what I love accents. Let me see. Is there another question? Always tempting to, but I think I've been caught out too much. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm sorry, I was reading a question, but I'm not quite sure I understand what the question is. Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay, I think I've got through all of the questions I had, and I should disappear now because it's been over an hour. And I used to get complaints for going over an hour because it was too long to listen to, and I think we had the problem in the beginning, so it's fine. But what one surprising thing have you learned in your vast experience of studying languages when you are not studying mode? Thank you. Surprising thing that I've learned. I think the thing that I've learned the most is the more about the human condition and what we do to ourselves, and I think the psychology behind language learning and the kind of things people say to themselves and do to themselves because they feel they're not doing enough. I used to get this. I started with this at school. Whenever people would do an exam or a test at school, and they say, "Oh, I got, I don't know, maybe they missed out on 5 marks," and they said, "Yeah, but I hardly studied for it. If I'd studied completely full time, 100%, I would have aced it. I would have got this. I would have done that. I would have." It was always I would have, coulda, shoulda, and people do that in language learning, right? So if I learn 100% of the time and I do this and I don't do anything else and I just focus on that, then I'll do it, and I'll do it in this amount of time. And we've put this crazy pressure on ourselves. And I think it's partly to do with we make comparisons to people who we perceive as having done something that we don't actually know that they've done. And they're in a situation we don't potentially understand fully. And we do it because sometimes we have been in a situation where we've been able to focus very much in a very intense way on something and achieved a goal that we had that was quite a high goal and a difficult goal to achieve. So we've done that, and we think that is something we can replicate over and over again. I think that with all of those experiences, we tend to put this pressure on ourselves to think that we can do that and replicate it again and again and again and again, and it's not realistic. And I think this is the thing that we need to remind ourselves, that we're not robots, and that it's okay to forget, and that when we learn languages as children, we didn't have the same the same psychological barriers in place that we do as adults. We're not as self-conscious. When we're children, when we're learning, children tend to just make mistakes, fall over, and get up and just carry on. Adults tend to have a lot more baggage. They're worried about what other people think, and we tend to get caught up in a lot of other things, sounding silly, sounding strange, or whatever. And also we have other responsibilities and other things going on in our heads, right? So even if we're not working on something, we're thinking about things. We tend to think a lot as adults. We've got a number of scenarios and things going on that we've got to remember and do. And I think that's probably the thing I've learned the most is to accept what's realistic, and to sort of set more realistic goals, and to not. And if I do set unrealistic goals, which I always do still, even to this day, I have to remind myself. So I did that with, about a year ago now, I started learning Korean. I set myself a ridiculously unrealistic goal. I said I was going to go through a level a month of the Talk to Me in Korean courses. I have not done anything close to that. And it's fine. In the end, I reevaluated it and decided that I was going to use the year just to get used to the sounds of Korean and the basic vocabulary and some basic structures. And it's that I've achieved, which is great. I don't need to rush in the same way as I thought I did. And I think that mindset change is the really important thing. So that's probably the most important thing I've learned out of all of this. That and the cool etymological links that I find between languages and continue to find. I love etymology, and I love finding links between languages. So yeah, I love those kind of comparisons. Yeah, I mean, I hope that, yeah, accept what comes and stay the course. Yeah, you're very welcome. College success. I hope that works. Should very cool that you did the Spanish on stream on Twitch. I watched a good part of it and it was very good. Thank you very much. I'll finish watching it soon, and I have to. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoy doing those kinds of interviews. I've done a few interviews in a few different languages on different channels, and this is why I kind of on my own channel that don't really feel the need to. I mean, I'll answer questions in different languages, of course, but I don't feel the need to just do an entire thing in a different language. I mean, why? But I do. I mean, if you want to hear me speaking Spanish, go to the Twitch thing and watch me or listen to me speaking and answering interview questions on Twitch in Spanish, or likewise on. I've done interviews in German and in Portuguese and French and whatever on radio stations, and feel free to find them and go and have a look. And if you want to hear me speaking other languages more, but yeah, I mean, on these channels, my own channels, I'm quite happy to speak English. I don't have anything really to prove to anyone. So yeah, thank you, JR. It's very kind. And yeah, so I mean, I look. I mean, when it comes down to it, okay, no one comes up to you with an award for speaking languages. You do it for you, and if you're not doing it for you, then it's kind of a bit pointless, really. You've got to want to do it, and you've got to want to enjoy doing it. And I'll encourage you to learn languages, and I'll give you advice from my experience, and I'll answer questions. But I'm not going to force anyone to do it. I'm definitely not going to tell people that they have to follow what I've done, because that would be ridiculous. I don't even tell my daughter to do what I've done. So why am I going to tell anyone else to do that? It makes no sense. I mean, it really makes no sense. And I'll continue doing these weekly live streams. I enjoy doing them with you, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. If you still want to sign up to study with me in 2022, then feel free to fill out the form. You're very, very welcome to do that. I'm going to look at the ones I've got in tonight and reply to some of you who've already applied, and start doing some interviews as well, because I'm gonna need to do interviews to sort of talk to people who I'm shortlisting to do this. And then for those of you who maybe I don't feel that are going to benefit the most from what I offer, I might think of other things that I can do. So it might be group things that we do. It might be something else that we do. We'll see. But I'll try and think of some other things that we can do as well, because I want to be able to help as many people as I can. The thing is, and this is why I kind of did this, is that I recognize that the books are out there. You can find the books, but some people really want that individual, and not me teaching you a language necessarily. I mean, the language is part of it, but it's more than that. It's the getting under the skin. It's the understanding everything about why you want to learn it and what you're doing and your methodology and your willpower, your staying power, your motivations, all of that. If we join, are we going to be on camera or on video? No, I would be doing live. So they will be live, like live discussions with me. This is like an hour a week of talking to me, and one-on-one for the ones that are going to do the one-on-one. And then I'll try and do, as I say, I'll see if I can do some group things. Some of the ones that I've got in are definitely more, I'm going to advise that you take, that some people just take a language teacher, because it's kind of this makes no sense for me to do the work of a capable language teacher. I think that it needs to be something that I can particularly help and help you with. So I want to do something that I will help you with, if that makes sense, because I want to get something out of it. I don't want to just sort of, my goal of this is not to become another language teacher out there, or even take the role of other people. It's things that I see and you see that I can specifically help you with. So, and things that I do uniquely, maybe maybe things that I say that strike a chord with you, and you feel that more conversation over a longer period of time will help you to discover that and to make the most of your language study. So anyway, it was nice to be with you again and to talk to you about languages, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Next week, same time, same place. Speak to you soon. Let me know in the comments. Remember to like, remember to subscribe and follow me. I always forget to do that. And also, let me know if there's anything you want to ask. I'm very, very happy to take requests and think about how I can combine things. I've seen a number of requests about raising multilingual children. I will look into how I do that, but I will maybe do that as well as a thing at some point in the future. But yeah, please do let me know. Take care, everyone. See you soon. Happy language learning.